Hello, everyone. Welcome to the CP Support webinar series. My name is Debbie Bayless, and today our webinar is about understanding the CFE. Before I begin, I want to extend a big thank you for the great partnership between CPA Western School of Business, CPA Ontario, and CPA Atlantic School of Business, for making sure that this valuable information is available for you as you prepare to write CFE in September. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to your appropriate region or province. I've included their email addresses here. Now, this webinar is approximately about 70 minutes. So, one of the big things is we want to make sure that you have a clear understanding of the expectations when it comes to CFE. A good analogy I use is think of CFE in the terms of a game. And in order to play the game, you need to understand what the rules are. In other words, what the expectations are. Because the goal is to play that game well so that you win. In this circumstance, we're talking about passing CFE. As a result, our 4 objectives are that we're going to spend time reviewing the structure of CFE. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time reviewing the passing profile for a candidate. I'm going to talk about the different approaches for day 1 versus day 2 versus day 3. Plus, I'm going to provide you with some additional resources. So as you are aware, CFE is a 3-day exam. Day 1 is 4 hours, day 2 is 5 hours, and day 3 is 4 hours. And throughout that time, you're being tested on your ability to meet the depth requirements, so that's the level of detail, and the breadth requirements. So from a quantitative perspective, that's the number of correct inputs based on the case facts provided. And from a qualitative perspective, that's meeting a sufficient number of qualitative factors based on the case facts provided. And this is all in conjunction with what the CPA Canada Competency Map says and at the specific proficiency levels. So I'm going to talk about that in further detail later on. So day 1 is a comprehensive case. For those of you who are writing the first time, you'll be writing Singular Textile Corporation. For those of you who are rewriting, you most likely will have chosen Willowdale Entertainment, Inc. And it's going to be that Capstone 1 case a few years later. The board of directors is going to be looking to you. You'll play the same role, so as an external consulting firm. They'll tell you what options or option that they implemented from Capstone 1, or potentially they might have implemented a different option that you've never heard of. They'll give you a synopsis of what happened, and then they will provide you with some great information about some other strategic alternatives, whether it's 4 or 5, and potentially an operational issue that they're looking to you to provide sound strategic advice. Now, your quantitative analysis will be in no way as detailed as what you did in the Capstone 1 case, because instead of several weeks, you only have 4 hours. The focus is really providing business advice. So for day 2, it's a comprehensive case. Everyone writes the same case. However, there'll be specific assessment opportunities or required. I use those words interchangeably. What you're being asked to do, there'll be common ones that everyone will need to do, and there'll be ones that are specific for your roles. Normally, your requirement is that those requireds are usually clearly defined. When it comes to your role, so you're going to choose, you probably already have chosen, whether you're going to specialize in performance management, audit and assurance, tax, or finance. Day 2 is the only day that you will be able to be tested and meet the requirements for your role specific. The information is organized by role, and as I said, there's some common background information for everyone. I'm going to go into greater detail later on again. Day 3 is a multi-subject cases, and there could be anywhere from 3 to 4 cases, ranging in time from 45 minutes to a maximum of 90 minutes. In day 3, you're going to be tested at the core level, and you're going to be tested across all 6 technical competency areas. So that is financial reporting, management and accounting, strategy and governance, audit and assurance, finance and tax. The assessment opportunities are less directive. And what that means is that they might not specifically ask you to do a particular task. However, based on the case facts that are provided, it's clear you need to discuss this issue. So let me give you an example. Say that in a case, the user says that they received a signing bonus for 150,000 and that they've recorded the full revenue. That's a trigger that you need to analyze that financial reporting issue, whether revenue was recorded correctly. Also, those assessment opportunities are more integrated. And what that means is that your analysis and recommendations for one assessment opportunity will impact your analysis and recommendation for another. So a common example is if there are financial reporting issues, you need to analyze those first, provide your recommendations, and implement those. So make the appropriate adjustments, say before you calculate materiality. There's a heavy focus on technical analysis. Now, from a proficiency level, for day 3, you're going to be tested, as I said, at the core level. Day 2, you're going to be tested at the core level for financial reporting and management accounting, but for your role, it's going to be at the elective level. And day 1, you're also tested at the core level. So let's spend some time. First of all, I'm going to do a high-level overview of the passing profile. And then we're going to drill down deeper because it's really important that you have a clear understanding of what the passing profile looks like for day 2 and 3. Now, you probably noticed I haven't talked about day 1. Day 1 is marked differently and separately, so I'll talk about that shortly. So in 2020, the Board of Examiners provided the following information. There are actually 4 levels that you need to pass your combined results for day 2 and day 3. Level 1 is a sufficiency test, and that is that you need to achieve an undisclosed score in order to pass level 1. And they only look at the assessment opportunities you achieved reaching competent or higher. Level 2 is it's a depth test, and that is about achieving an undisclosed number of competent responses for financial reporting or management accounting. Level 3 is to meet the depth requirement in your role specific, and that is an undisclosed number of competent responses. Level 4 is a breadth test, and you need to achieve an undisclosed number of reaching competent across all of the technical competencies. So I'm going to go into greater detail for you. So you've noticed I've talked about 2 specific ratings, reaching competent and competent. When it comes to assessing each of your response for each of the assessment opportunities, there's a possibility of 5 different ratings. NA is not addressed, so you didn't address that assessment opportunity. NC is nominal competency, and that means that your response was a really superficial attempt and that you did not meet the breadth or the depth requirements. Reaching competent means that you've either met the breadth or depth requirements, while competent means that you've met both of them. Competent with distinction means that you've exceeded those expectations. So let's talk about, and this is valuable information from the Board of Examiners. Each of those assessment opportunities are designed to answer the question, what would a competent CPA, entry-level CPA, do in these circumstances? So to attain a pass standing, candidates must address the issues in the simulation, so the cases that are considered significant. So let's go and drill down to each of those areas. If you notice, hopefully very quickly, that you need to pass all 4 levels to pass your day 1 and 3 and day 2. I'm sorry, your day 2 and day 3. So as accountants, let's use some numbers. Now I want to caution you. This is all hypothetical. The only people who know what is needed to pass each of the levels is the Board of Examiners and the markers. If someone tells you, oh, I know how many assessment opportunities you need to achieve competent in order to pass level 2, they don't. It's only conjecture. The same principle applies if someone says, oh, you need to make sure that you include these many qualitative factors, pros and cons. Again, it's all conjecture. What I can say when it comes to your qualitative analysis, the more qualitative factors they give you, the more that you would need for a competent response. So if they give you 15 in a case, they're going to want more than if they've given you 6. But you certainly don't need to provide them all in order to meet a competent response. So let's look at those numbers. So let's say collectively between all of the assessment opportunities to pass level 1, you need, you know what, the potential score is 100 points. And they're going to set a bar and say they set the bar that you need to achieve a score of a minimum of 80. And again, that's the combine of reaching competent or higher assessments. So I want to share with you, this is an interpretation of the level 1 scoring. For those of you who are enrolled in Capstone 1, Capstone 2, you will notice that the Capstone 2 education team uses this interpretation. Again, it's for illustration purposes only. But there's some important takeaways from this. So if you do not address an assessment opportunity or receive a nominal competency rating, 0 points are awarded. If you are rated as reaching competent, you receive 1 point. If you receive a competent rating or competent with distinction, you receive 2 points. So here are some valuable takeaways from this sample. There's a significant difference between reaching competent, 1 point, versus competent, 2 points. And there is no difference between receiving a competent rating or competent with distinction. So this interpretation of the level 1 scoring absolutely support what I always say. It's critical that you complete all of the assessment opportunities to the best of your ability within the time frame you have and achieve as many competence as possible. So for level 2, perhaps what the requirement would be is that you need to achieve 20 competent for either financial reporting or management accounting. When it comes to level 3, which is your role specific, perhaps maybe you need to achieve 30 competent in order to pass level 3 for your role. When it comes to level 4, Perhaps what the expectation would be is that you need to achieve at least reaching competent or higher 25 times. However, there's also another requirement is that you have to reach a minimum of, say, 5 reaching competent or higher for each of the technical competency areas. So an important learning here is in order to pass level 4, you can't avoid any of the technical competencies. Unfortunately, I have seen candidates who've passed level 1, 2, and 3. They've met the expectation for every technical competency in level 4 except for tax. You cannot avoid any of the technical competencies. So I wanted to create a visual that really gives you a great sense of what's the power of achieving competent responses. So as we know, based on the interpretation, if you don't address an assessment opportunity or achieve a nominal competency rating, then that will not be counted towards any of the levels. If you achieve a reaching competent in any of the assessment opportunities, then let's use that 1 point value as an example. You get 1 point under level 1, and then it will count towards the requirement for the appropriate and associated technical competency for level 4. Now let's look at if you achieved a competent for one of your assessment opportunities in financial reporting. Let's say you're awarded 2 points, plus under level 2, that would be counted towards the undisclosed number for financial reporting, competent responses, plus it goes towards level 4. The same premise applies if you achieve a competent for a management accounting assessment opportunity. There's your 2 points. That helps you in level 2, plus it counts towards requirements in level 4. Now let's look at the impact of achieving a competent when it comes to your role-specific assessment opportunities. So let's say that you're going to specialize in performance management. So you would be awarded 2 points for a competent response for that assessment opportunity, plus that would count towards your level 3, and it's going to count towards level 4 under strategy and governance. So again, I hope the big takeaway here is that the power of achieving competent responses. It's going to increase your chances of meeting the requirements, the undisclosed requirements for level 1, 2, 3, and 4. So let's look at what the breakdown of the assessment opportunities have been for the last 3 CFEs. Well, based on the Board of Examiners reports, they've had 7 assessment opportunities for your role, 6 for financial reporting and management accounting, and then in day 3 for tested at the common level, 3 for strategy and governance, 3 for audit assurance, 3 for finance, and 3 for tax. So there's been a total of 31 assessment opportunities. Again, the key takeaway here is, because I hear a lot of candidates who say, I'm very comfortable with financial reporting. I only need to pass the financial reporting to meet the level 2 requirements. So it's okay if I get reaching competent on management accounting. And then sometimes they hear the reverse from other candidates. Well, look at the numbers. The number of assessment opportunities for financial reporting and management accounting are very much the same, and they're very close to your role. So those are really going to drive, in particular, your performance when it comes to level 1. So let's talk about the different approaches for day 1 versus day 2 and day 3. So from a timing perspective, really think about allocating your time to 4 different buckets. So CPA Canada recommends that you spend the first 60 minutes reading the case, creating your situational analysis, and your outline. And I'm going to talk more about that situational analysis because it's critical when it comes to day one. Then to take 15 minutes to pause and reflect. Now, during that time, you're going to be determining what order to complete your requireds and allocating your time, which means then you should spend about approximately 150 minutes writing your response. Save some time so that you can go back and make sure that you've done everything that you've been asked to do and that you really have a very strong overall recommendation section. So when it comes to your situational analysis, some candidates really struggle. They perform the situational analysis, but they use it as it's just a standalone document. And that's not its purpose. It's supposed to be used as a checklist because when you've created it, you've extracted the most important case facts that are needed so that you can clearly demonstrate that you understand the internal and external environment in which the company operates, the objectives they want to achieve. Because when you go to analyze those strategic and operational initiatives, you want to apply those relevant case facts. It's important to memorize some key information from Capstone 1 case, and that includes the company's mission, vision, values, and the industry's key success factors. However, be on the lookout because in day one, some of those factors might change. You should always be guided by what is given to you in the day one case. The good news is that you could use the same factor that you've identified in your situational analysis more than once to be counted towards what we call integration. Now, some of this I'm giving you a very high level overview, but please be on the lookout for our upcoming webinars because I'm going to spend a lot of time diving very deep into how to successfully pass day one. So I'm going to go into this in much greater detail. So here are the Board of Examiners' expectations when it comes to the situational analysis, that you highlight the internal factors, the mission, vision, and values. The external factors, what are the key industry trends? What's the opportunities? What's the threats that would influence the company's business and have an effect on the key decisions that they're making? Make sure that you include any significant changes that have taken place. Be directed by the changes in the day one case. Identify the company's objectives. What do they want to achieve? And when you're analyzing those different options, implementing that option, will it help the board achieve its goals or will it hinder their opportunity to achieve those objectives? So in other words, it will make the situation worse. It's important to recognize any of the predominant or overarching issues. I'm going to go into that in a little bit detail here and even more when I do the day one webinar. So here's some comments from the board reports that talk about the day one design. So it allows you to demonstrate high level of professional skills, and you need to focus, your analysis needs to focus on what's relevant and critical to strategic decision making. Professional judgment is needed, and you're going to display your ability to synthesize information. So here are some examples of some predominant overarching issues that have affected the company at the entity level. So it affects almost every decision that the company makes. And these are examples from previous CFE exams. So poor communication, whether there's conflicting objectives between the board members, conflict of interests, lack of long-range planning. There could be a supply or production constraint. If there is a supply or production constraint, every time you analyze an option, you need to talk about the impact it will have on supply. That's an important pro or con. Going concern because there's significant financing constraints. There could be limited cash to invest in a strategic option, or there's going to be limited cash because something's occurring in the near future, whether that's repayment of debt or repurchase of shares. Reputational risk, whether it's an ethical or a fraud issue that could negatively impact the company's reputation. There could be limited management expertise and or time. So say throughout the case, they give you an example where management is saying, we're having trouble doing everything that we have. Certain things have not gotten done. Well, when you analyze each of the strategic options, you need to discuss and consider whether it's a strong pro or a strong con. What's the impact to management time? When you're providing your overall recommendation, if management time is limited, perhaps all of the options are viable, but you certainly can't recommend them all. First thing is solve the overarching issue. Make sure that management has the available time. And it could be a strong reason why you implement one option over another. Or even though one option is really strong, it might be the reason why you don't recommend it. There's a lack of focus on the core business, lack of innovation, inability to reduce costs. A company's competitive advantage could be eroding. There could be unrealistic timelines or a downturn in the economy. These are all, if you notice, they're either significant weaknesses within the company itself or they're significant threats in the industry. Because not all qualitative factors are equal. These are important to consider in your analysis of all of the required and when you provide your overall recommendations. So here are some comments, again, that I've taken from the board reports in regards to what constitutes strong performance. So candidates who performed well identified the predominant overarching issues and they explained the impact. They displayed a greater depth of understanding and integration. So say the issue was there was limited cash available. So every time they analyzed each of the strategic and operational issues, they talked about the impact on cash. And then when they provided the overall recommendation, they absolutely looked and made sure that they didn't exceed the capital available. And when it came to prioritizing what should be implemented and when, they would have used that maybe a particular option should have been implemented first because it would end up with strong cash flow. Also, they identified and provided in-depth discussions of the most important decision factors. Now, one of the things that we notice is candidates focus on whether, implementing an option is aligned or misaligned with the company's mission, vision, values, and the key success factors. And they end up just focusing on that from their situational analysis. Well, in some instances, those aren't the most important factors. And again, I'm going to talk about that more in day one. So simply talking about, particularly if every one of the options is at least partly aligned with the company's mission, vision, and values, it's not a differentiator. So you wouldn't meet the expectations when it came to integration. Strong performance provided valuable quantitative analysis. So they used an appropriate tool to provide information to the board so that they had a clear sense of whether implementing that option would help them achieve their objectives. They prioritized their strategic recommendations. So they explained why one alternative should be pursued over another. And again, using the rationale behind the ability to achieve the objectives and to address those overarching issues. On the other hand, weak performance, they simply listed the case facts when they performed their SWOT analysis. They did not answer that question, so what? What is the potential positive or negative impact to the company? You need to meet the depth requirement. You cannot simply restate case facts. They've been given to you. You need to answer that question, so what? What is the potential positive or negative impact to the company? Now, I know a lot of candidates say, well, the why and impact is very obvious. Well, what's obvious to you and I might not be obvious to someone else. And also, the marker can only give you credit for what's on the page. When it came to their analysis of the company's overall financial performance, and that's part of the strategic, your situational analysis, they didn't discuss the implications. Okay, so how would that impact the decisions that they're making? When they attempted to integrate, some of those key factors from their situational analysis into their pros and cons for the strategic options, they were very generic or they weren't appropriate. Even when they talked about whether implementing that option was aligned with the mission vision, they just said it was aligned. They didn't describe how implementing that option would satisfy the mission or vision. When it came to the quantitative analysis, the tool that they used was incorrect. It didn't provide value-added information. Or there were lots of errors, it was unstructured, it was unclear, and difficult to follow. When it came to the conclusion and overall recommendation, they didn't step back and consider the broader perspective. Okay, what are those overarching issues? How much capital do they have? How do we prioritize? And so what happened is, if you do not consider, if there's overarching issues, if you do not consider supply and there's a supply constraint, you haven't considered it, and your recommendations, your overall recommendations are, it ends up being that you would exceed that supply, you would end up, unfortunately, failing day one because your recommendation is not credible, nor is it viable. So now let's talk about approaching day two. And day two, as I said, is one comprehensive case that everybody writes. There's sections that are for everyone, common sections, and there's sections that are role specific. So when you first look at a day two case, it can be very daunting because it can range from 50 to 60 pages or so. Focus on what you need to look at only. So as I said, you've got the background information. That's for all roles. Then you're going to have specific requirements for your role. And in the upcoming Path to Competent and day two, I'm going to share with you a best practice on how to create an efficient and effective outline for day two. And the first thing I say is go to your specific requirements. Go to your role. They're sorted alphabetically. Just look at what your role needs. Don't look at what anybody else has to do. Then you can go to the background information and take out what you need. And the same thing applies from appendices. You have common information and you have role specific information. So again, let's look at those 4 buckets of time. Recommended that you spend 75 minutes reading and creating your outline. Take that 15 minutes and the pause and reflect. What you're really doing is, what order do I need to do my requirements? How much time am I going to allocate for each of those assessment opportunities? Then take about 195 minutes to write your response. Remember, save some time at the end so that you can go back, make sure that you've answered everything that they've asked you to do. So there are some very important success factors when it comes to day two. It's critical that you know your role well. You're being tested at the elective level. And I'm going to talk more about that. Know how your role integrates with financial reporting and management accounting. In particular, there's a really close relationship if you're going to be specializing in day two in performance management, very close relationship between performance management and management accounting. If you're specializing in audit and assurance, there's a very close relationship between audit and assurance and financial reporting. If you're enrolled in CAP Zone 2, during the module workshop on the second day, we actually go through an activity that identifies some key tasks, financial reporting and management accounting tasks that relate to your role. It is critical that you build your skills to be able to shift through that common information because it's for everybody, which means there's some information there that you need to complete your assessment opportunities, but some of that information you do not need. You've got to shift through it. So let's talk about the design. The Board of Examiners, when it comes to day two design, says it allows candidates to demonstrate their technical competency in the common financial reporting and management accounting competencies. So those are the common ones, and your chosen role. So let's look at some comments from recent board reports. First, we're going to look at from a quantitative perspective for management accounting. So strong candidates, they incorporated case facts, relevant case facts. They chose the appropriate quantitative tool and they made the appropriate adjustments. On the other hand, weak candidates tend to devote an unproportional amount of time to performing their calculations. And what ended up happening is that meant that they had limited time to meet the qualitative expectations. Unfortunately, they did not integrate relevant case facts or incorrectly applied the information. And this is all about this all relates to your reading, outlining, and planning process. And they did not use the appropriate quantitative tool. And the tool to use is dictated by what's the question that you need to answer? What type of information is given? If you find you struggle determining the appropriate quantitative tool, a great upcoming webinar is time management in day three, because I spend quite a bit of time going through most of the quantitative tools. From a qualitative perspective for management accounting, strong candidates, they explained the implications. So they didn't just state the case facts, they answer the question, so what? What's potential positive or negative impact? And they tied that back, okay, as much as they could to the financial impact. They addressed the key risks, the risks that would directly impact the company's bottom line. And from a breadth perspective, they used more case facts to support their qualitative discussions. What that meant is during their planning process, they extracted the relevant case facts and included it in the outline. On the other hand, weak candidates, they simply listed the factors. They just restated the case facts. They didn't discuss the impact to the company, or they conducted a one-sided discussion. As CPAs, we need to have an objective discussion. We need to talk about both the positive and negative reasons for implementing an option. Unfortunately, they used an inappropriate strategy. They were going for volume over quality. So they wanted to list as many relevant case facts as they could, but they didn't address the why and the impact. You will not achieve a competent response if you simply restate case facts. You've got to answer that so what. They didn't meet the breadth requirements, and that's the number of appropriate factors based on the case facts provided. Many times, candidates spend a lot of time figuring out or making up qualitative factors. They're looking for your ability to extract the relevant case facts that were given to you. There are points assigned, or not points, but there's requirements to identify those specific case facts. When it came to financial reporting assessment opportunities, well, strong candidates, they used the correct reporting framework, whether that was ASPE or IFRS. It's impossible to achieve a competent if you're not using the right accounting framework. Make sure that you're well aware of that. For example, for revenue recognition and inventory, they identified that there were more than one issue and they addressed them individually. They understood and applied the case facts appropriately to determine if there's more than one performance obligation. And performance obligation seems to be a real area of development for a lot of candidates. Make sure that you understand the criteria to determine if there are more than one distinct performance obligation. When they performed their analysis, they made sure that they integrated, that they included the relevant case facts in their analysis to support the conclusion whether that criterion was met or not met. And they provided a recommendation that was consistent based on their analysis. On the other hand, weak candidates, they did their issue statement and then they just jumped right to the conclusion. There was limited or incomplete analysis. You will not achieve a competent response even if your recommendation is right. The marker needs to see your rationale. How did you arrive? So your analysis and your ability to apply the relevant case facts to arrive at the proper conclusion, whether that criteria met or not, is critical to achieving a competent response. And in some cases, they made the incorrect conclusion. And again, lots of issues when it comes to around performance obligations. So when it comes to your approach for day 3, I've mentioned it's important to allocate time. It's important to manage your time. Time management is one of the top 3 reasons why candidates fail CFE. So it's critical, especially when it comes to day 3, because that's when everyone's feeling the time crunch. Allocate 25 to 30% of your total time should be spent on reading, creating your outline, and planning. Don't fall into that trap that you're feeling the pressure that you've got to start writing, because during these upcoming webinars, I'm going to share with you a best practice of how to create an outline in Word that you can efficiently and effectively turn it into your response. So your outline, I'm going to go into greater detail. It can be electronic or handwritten. If you're going to use paper, make sure that you use, you have access to a full booklet that you can use. Make sure that you're not trying to put everything all on one page. However, I'm going to challenge you. Give it a try. It's going to take a little bit of while, but practice creating your outline in Word so you can turn it quickly into a response. Make sure that your information is logically organized. So when it comes to the day 3 design, the Board of Examiners comments are that it allows candidates to further demonstrate your depth and breadth when it comes to financial reporting and management accounting. Plus, you're giving multiple opportunities to demonstrate your breadth in all of the other technical competency areas. So again, you're going to be tested in all 6 technical competency areas at the core level. So let me show you what the last 2 CFEs looked like. So both of them had 3 cases for a total of 240 minutes. The case time ranged from 70 minutes to 90 minutes in total. So that meant that you would have anywhere from 18 minutes to about 25 minutes, because that's your 25 to 30% of your time, that you would allocate to read the case, create your outline, allocate the time for each of those requireds. And you would have a variety of anywhere from, so for the shortest time, for the 70-minute, you needed to complete 5 assessment opportunities. And for the 90-minute, you had 7 assessment opportunities. So as you can tell, just by strictly numbers, it is critical that you manage your time well, which means you've got to allocate your time, your start and stop time, and you need to move on. Because going back to how best and what do you need to do to pass CFE, the best approach is to make sure that you complete all of the assessment opportunities to the best of your ability within the time frame you have and to get as many competent responses as possible. So there's lots of resources available to you. Under Introduction to Capstone 2 and CFE, under the resource section, you have access to the CFE blueprint. You also have access to the Board of Examiners reports, which include past CFE exams, they call them simulations, and marking guides. Also, a very, very important information that you have access to is again under Introduction to Capstone 2 and CFE, and under the Complete Capstone 2 technical review, there's study material there. And that material, there's several day 3 and there's 2 day 2 cases. So again, best way to prepare for CFE is to practice previous CFE cases within the time frame that you've given. So now let's talk. I've talked a lot about competent, and we know that this is critical when it comes to passing CFE. So let's make sure that we have a clear understanding what that looks like. Plus, I've talked about proficiency level. So as a result, I want to drill down into the competencies and proficiency level. I also want to review the evaluation process for day 1, 2, and 3, and provide you with some additional resources. So as you know, again, let's repeat those 6 technical competency areas, and you know that you need to meet to pass level 4, you've got to meet the undisclosed minimum amount of RCs in each of the technical areas, which are financial reporting, management accounting, strategy and governance, audit and assurance, finance, and tax. Now that's the foundation. So it's critical that you have a strong technical foundation. What really makes the difference and increases your chances of passing CFE are your enabling competencies. In particular, managing yourself. That's all about time management, about adding value. That is all about meeting the depth requirements, solving those problems and making decisions. And from a communication piece, being able to create a response that is clear, concise, and easy to follow. So let's take a moment to talk about the proficiency levels. Now, the good news is the proficiency level clearly communicates where you should prioritize your time. And it also gives you a really strong sense of the amount of effort you need to put behind to achieve a competent response. So, competency level, proficiency level A is the highest, then B, then C. So when you're preparing and you're reviewing the technical skills under each of the technical competencies, you want to start with proficiency level A, then B, then C. So let's look at what the expectations are against each of those levels. For level C is about your ability to explain, describe, and demonstrate your knowledge. Level B is meeting level C expectations, plus your ability to analyze problems and draw logical conclusions. And that is in routine situations of low to moderate complexity. Proficiency level A covers everything under C and B. Plus, it's your ability to analyze problems in sufficient depth. And that's for both routine and non-routine situations of moderate complexity. So let's talk about, and I want to share some very valuable insights from the Board of Examiners. What they do is when it comes to routine situations, routine non-complex situations, the candidate is expected to be able to perform at a higher level than a non-routine, complex situation. So, in other words, if it's routine, then the expected proficiency level is higher. Okay? If it's non-routine, the expectation might be lower. So generally, the higher complex non-routine situations are not testable, and they're outlined in Appendix A of the CPA competency map. So let's talk about, and I want to build some strong understanding of the process of creating CFE, of marking CFE. So as part of the FAIR pass process, the board carefully considers whether the results for the assessment opportunities are affected by any of these items listed here. I'm just going to really hone in on the third bullet point. So they consider the level of difficulty for each assessment opportunity in each simulation, so each case. Because remember, the goal is to test you at the proficiency level that is required for an entry-level CPA. So during their testing time, before the live marking ever happens, they make sure that the marking guide is going to be assessing you at the proficiency level of an entry-level CPA. If the marking guide isn't doing that, then they will change the requirements. Let's look at the evaluation process. It's important to understand this because I want you to have full confidence that there's a very robust process in place to ensure that your response was carefully reviewed. As far as the marking guides, so the marking guides are published. Uh, they're created 6 to 12 months before CFE ever happens. This information, the cases, and the marking guides are shared with provincial and regional reviewers. And they're going to go through that information, and they could be academic individuals, they could be previous CFE writers. Their feedback is carefully considered in conjunction with the feedback from the experienced markers. And so if adjustments are needed, they are made before CFE is ever published. So let's look at what the Evaluation Center looked like for 2025. There are approximately 100 individuals that were chosen to participate in September 2025 CFE Evaluation Center. I want you to have full confidence in the vast experience that these individual markers have. So they're selected based on their marking experience, motivation, academic experience, work experience, personal references, and regional representation. Plus, the marking is also supervised from the CPA Canada Evaluation and International Assessment Full-Time Board professional staff. So in advance, before any live marking happens, the members of the CFE subcommittee, the staff, leaders, assistant leaders, they participate in a 4 to a 6 day preliminary evaluation center. And what they do during that time is they just randomly pull some responses and they use the marking guide. They then assess everything to make sure that those marking guides, again, are testing the proficiency level of an entry-level CPA. They make the appropriate adjustments before live marking starts. So the evaluation process for day one, so as I've said, day one is marked separately. There's 4 outcomes. You could achieve a clear pass, a clear fail, a marginal pass, or a marginal fail. Everyone's response is marked once. Then they use what they call a borderline model scheme. And what that is if a candidate marginally passed or marginally failed, then someone else will mark that response again. If their assessment is different than the first assessment, then that response is escalated and either a team leader or a senior marker marks it again. And ultimately, their assessment determines whether that candidate passes or not. So, what they're looking at, and they take an opportunity to reflect. I want to share with some of the questions that they ask. Did the candidate step back and see the bigger picture and then address the broader issue? So again, understand what the most important factors are that's happening internally and externally. Did they prioritize the issues? Did they use both quantitative and qualitative information to support their discussions and conclusion? Did the candidate use the appropriate tool to provide valuable insight to the board? Whether implementing that option will achieve the board's objectives. Did they use sufficient case facts to support their discussions? That's all about integration. And again, the day one webinar, I'm going to go into great detail about that. And did the candidate communicate their ideas clearly, integrate, and synthesize that information? So when it comes to day two, the day two assessment opportunities are the common ones. So those are the ones for financial reporting and management accounting. They're marked separately from the role specific assessment opportunities. And again, to clarify, for your role, you'll either choose performance management, finance, audit insurance, or tax. Every response is marked twice. If there's any difference between the first and the second assessment for any of the opportunities, then an arbitrator is engaged and that response is reviewed again, and that arbitrator makes the final decision. When it comes to day three, what happens is they also use that borderline model. So what happens is once day three is marked, they're going to look at the candidate's performance against all of the levels. If the candidate passes their role specific level, but they failed day three, then what will happen is that day three response will be read again and assessed again. And if that assessment is different, the same process is, they will escalate that and the arbitrator would be the final decision maker. So I'm hoping from this information that I've shared that you have a clear understanding that there is a very robust process in place and that the markers are making sure that they've carefully reviewed your response. The senior leaders and the assistant team leaders, they spend most of their time cross-marking and randomly pulling responses for quality control. So some additional resources are that CFE blueprint, the board reports. There's a document called the Common final examination and competency reference evaluation methodology. Very long title. I want you to know that all of the webinars, the information from these resources, I've pulled them. So I've included the best of and the most important information in these webinars for you. So let's talk about how do you prepare to write CFE? And that's whether you're preparing to write the first time or you're a rewriter. I want to focus on making sure that you've selected the best role for you, and if you're rewriting, what areas to focus on to increase your chances of passing. So here's some important information from the Board of Examiners when it comes to role selection. They're finding it appears to be that more candidates, they don't seem to be comfortable with their chosen role. Remember, the expectations differ for the day 2 role because you're being tested at the elective proficiency level. So what you would need for a competent response for, say, strategy and governance um, at the core level is different. It's lower than what you would need as a as for a competent for performance management assessment opportunity. The Board of Examiners strongly encourage candidates to select their day 2 role carefully and to consider their ability to respond to that competency area at the elective proficiency level. Choose your role carefully. So when you're deciding which roles to select, and I know at this point you're thinking, well, I've already selected my role. It's early stages as you're preparing for CFE. It's not too late to have a heart-to-heart conversation with yourself. Make sure that this is your best choice. So think about, is this a strength of yours that you're proficient at? You have experience. Think about if you completed the professional education program. Was this an elective you took? How well did you do when it came to the module exam? If you marginally passed that elective, statistic-wise, it's very difficult to pass and meet the requirements for day 2. So carefully consider that. When you're looking at performance management, ask yourself, because work experience really does make a difference. Are you working in or planning a management accounting role? For finance, are you working in or planning to pursue a career that provides investment and finance advice? For assurance, do you have experience in assurance? Okay, that's critical. Are you interested in pursuing assurance? Okay, to be able to be involved and work in assurance engagements or internal audit. For tax, do you have experience in tax? Is this a career that you're looking at? Are you strong in these areas? If you are rewriting CFE, then here's some information I want to highlight. So for day 1, carefully review the automated feedback. It'll help you identify your areas of development so you can create an action plan. So look at, for situational analysis, did you meet the integration requirements? When it came to the analysis of the major issues, I highlighted all 3 areas that I commonly see. Did you lack a valuable quantitative analysis, which meant you either didn't use the appropriate quantitative tool or there were a lot of errors within your calculations? Did you miss the breadth requirement? That relates back to your reading and creating that outline. You didn't extract enough relevant case facts. Did you miss the depth requirement? That's all about answering that question. So what? When it came to your conclusion and recommendations, did you address the strategic concerns of the board? What are those overarching issues if they exist? Did you make sure that your recommendations considered that and solve those issues? There's always there's only so much money that they have to spend. Did you make sure that your recommendations did not exceed the capital available? If you didn't consider it, then that results in a fail. And or did you not address the interrelationship? So the impact implementing one option would have on other options. And again, we're going to go into great detail during our day one CFE support webinar. Here is a summary of a candidate's performance when it came to day 2 and 3, because there's some valuable information we can deduct from this. So if you notice, let's start at the bottom, level 4. The candidate passed meant that reaching that number of undisclosed, reaching competent or higher. They passed their role. When it came to level 2, they met the depth, so they met the undisclosed number of competent responses or higher for management accounting, but they didn't meet the depth in financial reporting. In the end, the reason the candidate failed was because they didn't meet that level 1, the sufficiency test. And that's an undisclosed score. And you notice here that they were ranked decile ranking 5, which means 40% of the candidates had stronger performance against the sufficiency. So when I'm looking at this, I'm seeing that there's a disconnect between reaching competent and competent, in particular when it comes to the financial reporting issues. So again, the focus will be on how do you increase both your technical knowledge and your ability to lend on those enabling competencies so that you can achieve more competent responses. Because, as I said, you can't, don't say, I'm just going to focus on financial reporting or I'm just going to focus on management and accounting. It's too much of a risk because the numbers say financial reporting, management accounting, they're very similar when it comes to assessment opportunities. Also, the Board of Examiners is noticing that there's a trend of declining technical abilities, that their candidates are generally avoiding those more complex topics, and they're struggling with most topics that have not been previously tested on CFE, even though it clearly says, and it's outlined in the competency map, that they're testable. Just because they haven't been covered in professional education program, just because they, if you haven't seen any a particular task, competent, a particular knowledge level tested on an exam, if it's in the competency map, it's testable. So candidates should expect a variety of issues of varying difficulty. They should ensure that they have a sufficient level of technical knowledge in all competency areas outlined in the competency map. Make sure that you're familiar with the reference schedule, okay? What that's given to you on the exam, what type of information is there? Because there's lots of instances where you need to use that information. So how do you prioritize your course material? Well, as we've said, and the last slide just pointed it out, the CPA competency map is your syllabus. An important tool to use is the Excel spreadsheet. So it's the competency map in Excel form. I'm going to go into great detail during the stress management webinar on how to sort the Excel spreadsheet. So again, I highly recommend that you do that. So we have a whole series of webinars available to you to really help increase your chances of passing CFE. As you know, this Understanding CFE, the recording is already available, sorry. And stress management, the recording could be available. If it's not, it will be available shortly. The path to competent in day 2. These are live webinars, so I strongly encourage you to register for them. If you aren't able to attend the live webinar, You will have access to the recording. So Path to Competent and day 2 is July the 22nd. Time Management and day 3 is July the 23rd. Day 1 for Meadowlark Entertainment Inc. is July the 28th. So if you're going to write that case, make sure that you attend that webinar or watch the recording. And day 1 for the Singular Textile Corporation, that's going to be done on July the 29th. Now you are able to access the recordings and register for these webinars. It's available through D2L. So under Introduction to Capstone 2 and CFE support, okay, homepage, or if you're enrolled in Capstone 2, it's also on the homepage. So I encourage you to watch the upcoming webinars. I hope that you can attend the live ones because I'm very confident that we have provided you with a solid foundation on which to prepare and write CFE. So best of luck, and I will talk to you soon.